Is Daf Tzadi Aleph 91 in Masechet Menachot. We are today's a little bit of a tricky daf. Like I said yesterday, knowing the text will help very much with this daf, but we'll do it regardless. And the reason why it's so sort of complicated is that there's this long, we've had all kinds of karbanot in Zvachim, in Menachot, and many of the karbanot this Torah describes after you say the karban, bring a nesach or a mincha that we call nisachim along with the carbon, right? Bring some flour, bring some wine. Different carbonot say that. But there's a separate standalone parsha in the Torah, in Bamidbar, Parak Tet Vav, in the end of Parshat Shlach, where it's just a parak, basically, about bringing nisachim. And the parak is very wordy, if anyone who looked at it, and it has all kinds of clauses that we're going to darshan pretty much in detail today about what the Torah is actually telling us. So I read yesterday Pasuk Gimel. I'm going to read it again. It says, "Vasitem isha lashem ola o zevach." You bring a sacrifice, a ola or a zevach, which we used yesterday to include a ola or a shlamim, and the word o is to tell you a toda. Lifalei neder u'b'nedava, to fulfill your promise or your nedava. Remember the difference. A neder is we say hare alai. I'm going to bring a karban, so if it gets lost, you have to replace it. Nedava is where you say hare zu. I'm going to bring this, and if it gets lost, you don't replace it. O b'mo adechem, the pasuk continues, or on your holidays, to make lasot reich nichoach l'Hashem, to bring as a kind offering to Hashem, min habakar min hatzon. And we were bothered by every word in that pasuk, all the extra, the bakar, the tzon, just to tell you, it continues and talks about what to bring. And pasuk says, pasuk hey, it says keves ha'achad. Pasuk vav, it says la'ayol ta'aseh. Pasuk chet says chitaseh ben bakar ola ozavach. So there's all these psukim that we're going to darshan. Like, what are we telling you about the different animals? But that's the basic parsha that we're dealing with. Says the Gemara today. We are up to Daf Tzadi Aleph from an Aleph, 6 lines from the top. Amar. Let's quote a verse from the Braita that we had yesterday. So the Braita said, Toda minayin. How do you know that a carbon Toda also needs nisachim? And we said it's because it says Talmud O. It says O, right? O zebach, right? It says Ola O zebach. The word O is extra. There's more. Why do you need a pasuk to tell you Toda? Atu Toda lab zebachu. I mean, if you just said the word zebach, which we said is a shlamim, why doesn't that include Toda also? Toda is certainly a carbon. Itzrich. We need an extra pasuk for Toda, because Samkadai Techamina, I would have thought to say, Hav Ika Lechem Bahada. A Toda actually doesn't need an extra bonus nisachim, because it has a built-in lechem, right? The Toda comes with 40 loaves of bread. So maybe you don't loti by nisachim, you don't have to bring extra nisachim. Says Gemara, well, that's not true about other carbonot. What about El Nazir? Ma'ishnami El Nazir. Remember the Nazir, the El Nazir is a shlamim. They bring types of bread with it, a basket, right, a sal matzot, and you bring nisachim. The Torah very clearly says that by Nazir. So Ika b'hada lechem u'bay nisachim. So you see that nisachim has nothing to do with bringing bread. Says Gemara, no, but a toda has a unique amount of bread. By a nazir, there's 2 types of bread, right? There's a chalot and a kikim. But by hacha, by toda, there's 4 types, as we talked about when we learned about toda. Arba minim. So you might have thought that you don't need to bring nisachim, kimashman that you do. Okay, so that's the first answer today. Says the Gemara, I get when the pasuk says, "Lifalei neder ol nedava," you're bringing a karban to fulfill your neder nedava. Shouldn't that include every karban that has to have nisachim? Why do you have the introduction of if you're bringing an ola or zevach, lichter rachmana? Let the Torah just say, we're at the 4th to last narrow line, "Lifalei neder ol nedava ubin nedava v'lo by ola." Right? Just say bringing a karban to fulfill your gift, which is what a ola is, and you don't need to say the word ola, because says Gemara, well, you're right. But think about if you had just read the Torah, and this is like a really beautiful exposition of how you might have conceived things had you been in an alternate reality, meaning had the Torah not said the same words. If you just read the pasuk that I read earlier, I'm going to read it one more time, not to bore everyone, but because it's so complicated. It says, "Vasitem isha lashem." Bring a karban. Then it says the words ola or zevach. I'm going to cut those out for a second. Then it says lefalei neder o b'nedava b'moadechem, to fulfill your neder and nedava, lasot reich nichoach l'Hashem, to bring as a karban to Hashem. So this essentially is a klal prado klal. The first part of the pasuk is very general. There's a specific detail of neder or nidava, and then there's a klal at the end, lasot reach nichoach. So ilo kater rachmana ola, if it hadn't said the word ola, havi amina, I would have read the pasuk in that way that I just read it. It says vasitem mishal Hashem, you bring a karban to Hashem, klal. That includes every karban. Then it says lifalei neder l'nedava, to fulfill your neder or your nedava, or at the last narrow line, prat. That's a detail, meaning a specific type of karban. L'reach nichoach, you bring it as a general karban, chazar v'klal. That now describes all karbanot. So I might have said at the first wide line, klal u'pradu klal, that the Torah is telling you which karbanot are brought as a for nisachim is a klal pradu klal, and iyata dan elokein prat. You basically include everything, and you compare it to the prat. And what would you say? Now, remember, in the Mishnah, we said that that the detail was that anything that's chayav to be brought, like a chatas and an asham, a chatas and an asham, or a pesach, a bechor, and a maser is excluded. But I would not have said that. I would have read the klal pradu klal and said, the main thing about the prat is that you bring it as a gift. It doesn't come because you did a sin. So I also will only include for nisachim things that come not related to a sin. So otzi chatat v'asham. So I'll exclude chatas and asham, which are brought for sins. Shein ba'in achat. But I would include incorrectly at this point Bechar Maser Pesach, because although the Torah says you have to do them, you don't do them because you did something wrong. They're done because that's the course of Bechar. It's the firstborn animal or the Maser. So Shein Ba'inachet Talmulomar Ola. Therefore, we say the word Ola to tell you it's not just a klal prado klal. In Ola tells you it has to be similar to an Ola, and remember the Ola is always brought as a nidava. So therefore, it has to be something that's brought always as a nidava, not as a requirement from the Torah, like Bechor Maser and Pesach. Says okay. So now that you say Ola, Shechtiv Ola, klal prat ma marbid. So what is the klal prat? So it says well, what you would say is ma prat nifarash enu mechuyav omed. Right? The prat is something that is not something you already have to bring. What does that mean? It means it's not something where basically the Torah says that you always have to bring it, meaning it's required in every case. Let's say like a karban chatat. Afkol she'enu mechuyav v'omed. So too, anything that's not always required has to have nisachim. What are we adding with that? Lahavi vladot kachim utmuratan va'olot haba'a min hamotorat. There's another case, two more cases. We'll give you a second to include the vladot kachim. Because let's say you dedicate an animal, right? And you say, I want to bring the shlamim. And the shlamim, which is a female animal, right? Could be a female animal, is unlike an ola, right? It has a baby, right? And so remember that baby becomes kodesh as well, and you have to bring it as a karban. So that is a requirement, but obviously you created that requirement. The Torah does not say you have to bring a vlad kachim or tmuratan or a karban tmura where you said, I want this animal B to be in place of animal A. Remember the halacha is that you bring both as a karban. If it's a tumura, v'shlamim, or an ola, it also needs nisachim because you essentially created it. It wasn't created on you. And ola ba'amin hamotarot. Remember, if you have extra money, right, you bring an ola from that. And the fourth case is a case of asham shnitak l'ri'iyah. Let's say you dedicate an asham, right, which is very interesting. You dedicate an asham, right, and your asham gets a mum. So what do you do with that asham? You have to let it go out. You let it pasture. Sorry, not that it gets a mum. The asham is you. Let's say the owner dies, right? Its baalim died, or you lose it and you separate a separate animals in asham, and you bring the second one as your karban, and then you find the first one. So what do you do with it? So there, the halacha is you don't bring it as an asham because you already brought a different one, but you let it pasture, you let it get a mum, you take the money and you buy a karban. So there too, because you chose almost, or you voluntarily have to do that, you bring nisachim with that karban and zvachim shnisbechu shelo lishman, as we had earlier. If you bring your maybe we had it earlier, I can't remember, earlier or later, we're going to have it soon. All zvachim that you shech shelo lishman, which are not yotze with those, but they are karban, and you have to bring nisachim. Okay, so that is what we learned from the extra pasuk, basically, of the klal pradu klal. Where are we up to? We're up to the seventh wide line, first word on the line. Says the Gemara now, hashta da'amrit o l'drasha. Now that you said that the word o right? Because it says Ola O Zevach. That the word O Zevach is extra, the word O, to tell you a drasha. Now you got to go back to the parsha in Shlach, and every word O seems to be extra. So let's deal each one and try to learn what we learn from them. Lefalei neder o nidava. It says if you bring your karban as a neder or a nidava, what do you need the O for? Right? Say neder nidava, neder unidava. What's the O lamali? It says where lechalkim. It's to tell you that it's one or the other. Itzrich, you need that. I would have thought if it just said neder unidava that you only bring nisachim if you bring a neder and a nidava. Adamaiti neder unidava lo libai nisachim. Kamash malan aiti neder lechudei libai nisachim. If you just bring a karban that's a neder, you need nisachim. Aiti nidava lechudei aiti nisachim. If you bring each one individually, you have to bring nisachim. So that's what the word O is there to tell you. As we said yesterday, this is a big question throughout all reading of the Torah, right? Does when the Torah says two things, as it said, Mekalel aviv v'imo, does that mean mother and father or mother or father? So Hanicha, the Rabbi Yoshio says it means both together, unless the Torah says separately. You need the word O to separate neder and nidava. El Rabbi Yonatan, who said yesterday that anytime we say two things, we mean one or the other. What do you need to say or? The definition of the pasuk is or, lamali. Says where you're right, but Sakadai Techamina, I would have thought, of course, you can bring a neder or a nidava, but maybe the Torah is saying one or both, meaning iti neder lechudei libay nisachim. You come and bring a karban that you made a neder, bring nisachim. Iti nidava lechudei, you bring a nidava libay nisachim. But if you come and bring both together, right? Iti neder unidava, maybe tiski b'nisachim dechad. Maybe it's a one-time usage kind of fee. It's not a karban usage. It's an owner. If an owner brings a neder and a dava, maybe just bring one time nisachim with them, not two. Kamash malan, it's O, meaning one or the other. And so that is what you learn according to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? Says the Gemara, now we're going to ask later what we learn according to Rabbi Yoshia, but that's what you learn according to Rabbi Yonatan. I said Yochanan, but I meant Yonatan. Says the Gemara, now what about O b'moadechem? Right, the pasuk said you bring it b'moadechem, and we learned yesterday moadechem meant to tell you that even karbanot that you have to bring on the moed, like an olat re'iyah or a shalmei chagiga, you have to bring nisachim. But what's the extra O for? Says the Gemara, I would have thought if it didn't say the word O, then maybe when it says that you have to bring a karban b'neder or nidava, it's referring to one or the other. Inami ibcha. Ola ushlamim b'neder. Let's say you bring both an ola and a shlamim of the same type, meaning I learned from the previous pasuk that if one's a neder and one's a nidava, you bring two nisachim. But what if you bring two karbanot that are both neder, or two karbanot that are both nidava? Inami ola shlamim b'nidava. Maybe you would say it's one karban, it's one name. Shem neder echad, shem nidava achati, v'tiskilei b'nisachim dechad. Maybe it would be sufficient to bring the sachim one time for both karbanot because they're both nidarim or they're both nidavot. Kamash malan o b'moadechem. The extra word o is there to tell you another time where you bring an individual karban. Not karban, nisachim. Even in that case. Okay, continues. Let's do the next o. It says v'chi ta'aseh. This is pasuk tet already. It says v'chi ta'aseh ben bakar. Ola o zavach. You bring an animal, a cow, right? A ben bakar, that's an ola or a zavach. Lamali. Why do you have the word o? Again, we're dashing every word o. Says the Gemara, because hanimi, I would have thought itzrich. Sakadai techamina, I would have thought that, when do you need to bring two nisachim for bringing two karbanot, which we just learned from the word o b'moadechem? That's hanimi leichad dekamaita ola ushlamim b'neder. Right? Both karbanot are a neder, but they're different karbanot. One's an ola, one's a shlamim, or nami ola shlamim b'nidava. But what if you have the same karban two times with the same requirement? Hecha dekamaiti shtei olot, chada b'neder, chada b'nidava. Sorry, let's say you bring two olot. Sorry, not the same requirement, but the same animal, the same karban. Sorry, you bring two karbanot ola. One is a neder, one is a nedava. Inami shnei shlamim, or you bring two shlamim. One is a neder, and one is a nedava. Maybe you should say nisachim only needs to come once. Ema shlamim achati and shem ola achati v'tiskli nisachim dechad kemashmalan. And then you'll just to finish the sugya, the last, again, we're learning each step along the way. That had you not had, if you just said neder or nidava, I would have thought, well, you have to bring neder and nidava. You don't bring nisachim if it's only one. So then we said it's even if it's only one. Then we said, well, if it's for each one, but maybe if you brought both together, you only bring nisachim. Then we said, no, they're independent. Then we said, well, maybe that's only true if it's a neder and nisachim. What if it's two neders of shlamim and ola, or two nisachim of shlamim and ola? There too, you bring two. What if it's two neders? Sorry, what if it's two olot of neder and nisachim? There too, we need a pasuk. And the last one, of course, is if you have two shlamim that are two neders, or two olot that are two nidavot, or the same thing, right? So the falei neder unidava, falei neder o shlamim, sorry, the extra o before shlamim, lamali. I would have thought the only place where you bring nisachim for two times is hani milecha demaiti shtei olot. Sure, you brought two olot, but one's an neder and one's an nedava. Chadam neder b'nedava. Inami shnei shlamim chadam neder v'chadam b'nedava. Avahecha dekamaiti shtei olot. Again, this is the last case. You bring exactly the same thing with the exact same karban. Two olot, and they're both neder, or shtei olot, and they're both nedava, or shnei shlamim, and they're neder, or shnei shlamim, and they're nedava. You might think that in that case, shem ola echadu, the ola is unique, is common to both animals. Shem neder echadu, and the neder is common to both animals, and therefore tiskilei b'nisachim dechad. You only need to bring nisachim one time. Kemash malan. So that was a very lengthy exposition of all the different groups that you now know have to require independent nisachim. Okay, so again, there are four different layers, because it could be both, it could be one or the other, it could be two if they are different carbanotes, two if they're the same carbanote, two if one's a neder and a dava, and finally, if they're same karban, same neder, you still need to bring nisachim two times. Okay, continues the Gemara now. We are around halfway down of the wide lines. I have a Zion in mind. I don't know if everyone has that. It says O b'moadechem, right? Or on the holidays, and we learned from there O b'moadechem. Where am I? No, sorry, I'm not in the right place, right? I lost the place. Give me 1 second. No, I'm further down, right? We are
Yeshua.
Thank you. Rabbi Yeshua. I got much further than that. Okay, sorry, I lost the place. This is around 11 lines from the bottom. Second word on the line. So this was something we said earlier. We said, remember that bakar umin hatzon, right? We said this yesterday, was teaching you, we said yesterday that bakar umin hatzon teaches you that you need to bring the O extra, O min habakar, O min hatzon, as we just said, teaches you that either one or the other. But according to Rabbi Yoshia, that every single time it says bakar umin hatzon, it means, right? According to Rabbi Yonatan, the word O is extra. But according to Rabbi Yoshia, what do you do with the word O, lamali, right? Why does it say one or the other? Says Gemara, I would have thought, according to Rabbi Yoshia, that if it just said bakar umin hatzon, hani mili betray mini, right? That in fact, the only time, remember, we talked about the type of carbon, which is an ola or shlamim. We talked about the neder or nadafa. But what about the animal, the species of animal? So you might have thought, hani mili, when do you bring two nisachim for two carbonot? Betray mini. If one animal is a cow and one animal is a sheep. If there was only one min, maybe again you can get away with bringing nisachim of one. Kamashmalan, that's not the case. Okay. Finally, the end of the pasuk was kacha teasu le'echad. This is how you do it. This again is much later at the end. It's pasuk Yud Aleph. We're up to actually kacha teasu le'echad. So where or your bet? Sakadat. Well, what do you need that pasuk for? Because I would have thought that time also matters. Hani mili, when do you have to bring separate nisachim for every karban? If you do them after b'zach harzeh, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, or one today and one tomorrow. Aval bevat achat, if you come at the exact same time with two karbanot, maybe tiskilei b'nisachim dechad, kemash malan, that even in that case, the halacha is kacha ta'aseh le'echad, every individual karban needs its own nisachim. Okay, so that is where we conclude. Again, we're going to get back to this actually when we read more of the psukim, but for now, that's the end of that braita, and this is how we learn that when you bring two karbanot, whether it's the same ola, the same neder, the same type of bakar or tzon, you bring an independent nisachim for every karban. Now we're up to the Mishnah, right? Or the part of the Mishnah we're explaining, the two dots. So the Mishnah said the only exceptions to where a chatat and an asham need nisachim are the chatato shel mitzora and the ashamo. The chatat of remember, mitzora brings many karbanot, including a shlamim, an el shlamim, a chatat, an asham, and an ola. The only example where you need to bring nisachim, it's not written in the Torah, it's not written explicitly, is by a chatat and an asham of mitzora. Minani mili, what's the source for that? There's a Rabbanan. There's a Braita. And the Braita goes to the pasuk. This is a whole different pasuk that's referring to the we're going to have this in a couple of weeks. It's a pasuk talking about the mitzora on the day that they become tahor, right? And it says, Shlosha esronim solat mincha. You bring 3 esronim of solat. Now, what do you bring 3 esronim of solat for? Right? Sorry, I said that there's an ola. We'll get there in a second. But you bring 3 esronim of solat. Mincha ba'emazevach katuv midaber. It's referring to the mincha that you bring with the karban, not a standalone mincha, but nisachim that you add on to the karban. Says, well, how do you know that? Maybe it's mincha b'b'fnei atzmo. Maybe the Torah is saying when you're a mitzora and you become tahar, you bring a separate mincha. Says, well, it can't be that because Kishu Omer, when it says later on in the parsha, ve'he'ela hakohen et ha'ola ve'et ha'mincha. It says the Kohen brings up the Ola and the Mincha, implying the Mincha comes with the Ola. Okay? It says, okay, fine. So now I understand that you have to bring a Mincha with your Karban for your Mitzorah. But it only talks about flour. What about the wine? Right? I don't know if you need to have wine or not. So therefore, Talmud Omer, there's a different pasuk, and this pasuk goes back much later to the parsha in Shlach, where it specifically talks about the Nisachim, the parsha we've been reading all day, and the Braita says the following. It says, Yayin l'nesach revi'it hin, you should bring wine for a quarter of a hin, ta'aseh al ha'olah, olah zevach, l'keves ha'echad. All these psukim are extra. So what do we darshan? Olah refers to olat mitzorah. The olah refers to the olah of the mitzorah. But the zevach refers to the chatat mitzorah. And the extra la zevach, refers to the asham mitzorah, right? So therefore, basically, there's an extra pasuk by the Nisachim to tell you that there's a case where you bring 3 things. The olah, of course, we know, because every olah has to do it. And this adds the chatat and the asham of the mitzorah, which the mitzorah has to bring. Says the Gemara, but why do you need 2 psukim, right? Typically, Tavayim mizavach. Right? Meaning, why do you need the word O to tell you zevach, zevach, to tell you chatas and asham? Both the chatas and asham are zvachim, they're both karbanot. So why do you need to have both? Damar mar. Now let's read this in a Braita. Turn the page to daf tzadi aleph amud bet. As we said in a Braita, chatat v'asham minayin. How do you know this Braita says that a nazir who brings remember, a nazir brings 3 karbanot. I said 4, but I made a mistake. I was referring to mitzorah, right? But sorry, the opposite. A mitzorah brings 3, a nazir brings 4. But we'll discuss that. How do you know that when a nazir, now referring to a nazir, brings chatat ve'asham, right? That they have to bring their chatat ve'asham, that they are allowed to take the remember, by a nazir they cut their hair, and it says in the pasuk that you take the hair that you cut off and you put it in the fire underneath the karban, right? So in the fire that's burning the karban, it's burning your shlamim, you put the hair of the nazir. Says the Braita, how do you know that you can also put your hair under the chatat v'asham? Right? The nazir also brings a chatat and an asham. How do you know that you can put the hair in the fire under that? Talmud lomar zevach. It says the word zevach, and zevach is a general term that includes every karban. So if zevach includes every karban, why can't the word zevach by nisachim include every karban of a mitzorah, both in chatas and in asham? Answers the Gemara, because hani mili hechad tervayo ki adadininu. That's only if all the karbanot have the same status. Avol hechad asham lahachshir. Remember, by a mitzorah, the purpose of the asham is to make the mitzorah kosher, meaning he gets rid of his tumah. The chatat comes by inan is the chaper. The purpose of the chatat is to forgive him for whatever sin happened to him that caused him to become a mitzora. So basically, the Torah describes different functions for the asham, which is there to be mitaher him, and the chatat, which is there to forgive him. So therefore, being on treikrai, therefore we need two psukim to tell you that you bring nisachim for both the asham and the chatat. Okay, says the Gemara. Okay, now let's go back to the Braita that we just discussed at the end of Amud Aleph. We said the word zevach means chatat mitzora. How in the world? I mean, I can think of many other chataot. The word zevach is very non-specific. How in the world do you know that the zevach is referring to chatat mitzora? Maybe it's chatat vasham de nazir. Maybe the nazir's chatat, which you don't bring nisachim for. Maybe you should. Maybe the word zevach is referring to the nazir. It doesn't make sense to say that. The Tanya, because the Braita speaks out that when it says by a nazir, uminchatam v'niskehem, that a nazir brings a mincha and nesach with their karban, it's referring to only the ola and the shlamim of the nazir. Ba'olato u'shlamav hakatuv medaber. How do you know that? Ata omer ba'olato u'shlamav. Maybe eno ela filo chatat. Maybe even the chatat of the nazir needs nisachim. Talmud Omer, therefore the pasuk says right afterwards by the Nazir, the next pasuk, "V'ta'ayil yaseh zevach shlamim u'minchato v'nisko." It says the word mincha and nesach again by the shlamim to tell you. Why would it say that again? Ayil b'chalaya. The ayil was included in the earlier pasuk that said bring nisachim. Lama yatsa. Why was it excluded? To tell you only things like the ayil, which is the ayil of the shlamim, are lahakishalet to compare to it. Ma ayil miyuchad ba b'nedro b'nidava. So too, the only things that require nisachim by a nazir are things that you can volunteer. But asham and chatas, which you can volunteer, don't require nisachim by a nazir. And therefore, we use this extra pasuk to add a chatat of a mitzora. Okay. Now the drasha, we're going backwards a little bit now, but the first question drasha we had was olah, and the olah was olat mitzora. Says Gemara, well, why do you need a pasuk to add olat mitzora? Why don't you say it's olat yoledet? Right? Now, again, why would you have to include an ola? Right? Generally, of course, an ola is something that you give as a gift. When a mitzora is a mitzora, they don't choose to become a mitzora, right? And therefore, the ola that's required of them is in some ways an ola of requirement. The Torah says, if you become a mitzora, you have to bring a carbon ola. So this ola is a little bit different than an ola that I just go and dedicate out of my own free will. But there's other olot like that. What about ola of yoledet? Right? A woman gives birth, she has to bring an ola. It's not a choice, right? The carbon is required. So maybe that carbon is what is meant by the pasuk, that you bring nisachim on that ola yoledet, but you don't bring nisachim on olat mitzora. Says Abaya, well, you don't need a pasuk for that. Because ola yoledet misefa dekra nafka. We learn ola yoledet from the end of the pasuk, the Tanya. You have a Braita that speaks that out. What does the Braita say? Again, I hope everyone is still following. This is a very complex series of things, but we're basically discussing now how you know you bring nisachim on an ola of a yoledet. And the Braita is around 10 lines from the top of Daf Tzadi Aleph Amud Bet. The Braita quotes Rabbi Natan. What does Rabbi Natan say? Rabbi Natan Omer, it says by, again, this pasuk, we're going back now to Shlach, where it describes all of the requirements of kvasim, of nisachim. And it says in Pasuk Hey, in Perek Tet Vav, La Keves. And that refers to, says the Braita, Zu Olat Yoledet. The Keves is referring to the Ola of a woman who gives birth, which again is not 100% voluntary because you have to do it. Ha Echad. What's Echad referring to? That's referring to another case, which is a very interesting case, where, remember, we're going to have this in Bechorot in a couple of months, maybe a few months, where you basically, if an animal, remember the 10th animal is supposed to be Kodesh, okay? And you're supposed to count your animals when they walk out of the pen, 1 to 10. Number 10, Asiri Yia Kodesh. We're going to darshan many times that if you make a mistake and you miscount, right? And the 10th animal, you forget to say 10. And by the 11th animal, you say number 10, that becomes Kodesh also. Now, it's not a maaser because it's not really the 10th one. It's just a regular shlamim. So ha-echad tells you ze achad asar shel maaser, the 11th animal of maaser, which you mistakenly call number 10, and you have to bring it shkarev shlamim. By calling it 10, you made it a karban. And although it's not your maaser, because number 10 is your maaser, it's a shlamim. Now, you have to bring, what's it called? Nisachim with that animal. Now, why not? It's a regular shlamim. Every shlamim requires nisachim. But the interesting thing is that it's only a karban because you called it your maaser, and your maaser would not require nisachim. So now this animal, which is karban because you called it maaser, requires nisachim, where the maaser does not require nisachim. Says the Gemara, says the Braita, that's very unique. Torah, you never find in the Torah sheyehei tafel chamor min ha'ikar. You never find that the thing that is less important, meaning the secondary thing, in this case the 11th animal, is more strict than the 10th animal. Here it is, because here the 10th animal is a maaser and does not require nisachim, and the 11th animal, which you called maaser, becomes a shlamim and requires nisachim. So that is the proof. Okay, now back to the beginning. Rava says, I got a whole nother explanation for why you learn from the pasuk that we quoted earlier, the pasuk, sorry, I'll read it again, of Shlosha Esronim Solat Mincha refers to the karbanot of a mitzora, the ola, the chatas, and the asham. What is the source, says Rava? Because three things. Ezu davar shetzarich shlosha ribuyim. We learned three extra psukim, actually, it's not the pasuk. The pasuk was, that was what we darshan from later in the pasuk, right? We darshan from Al ha'ola, ola zavach, which is three things, ola, o, and zavach. Ezu davar shetzarich shlosha ribuyim. Which karban requires three extra ribuyim? Havyomer zu mitzora, because the mitzora is chatas, an asham, and an ola. Okay. Now, going back now to the parsha in Shlach, right? So we said, remember, we're dashing every single word from that parsha and what requires nisachim based on how we darshan that pasuk. So the next thing we want to darshan is the pasuk of li'ayil. And we are, I don't know, I guess almost more than a third of the way down. Last word on a line, right? It says the word li'ayil, lamali. What do you need the pasuk where it says that you bring a nisachim have to be brought li'ayil? Says Rashesha, that's the Rabot Elosha Aaron. That includes the ayil that Aaron brings on Yom Kippur. That the ayil of Aaron is considered to be his own private karban in some ways, and therefore you have to bring nisachim in that karban. Says Gemara, well, what do you mean? Elosha Aaron mi b'moadechem nafka. It says already, karbanot that you bring on the holiday, like Olot Re'iyah and Shamei Chagiga, need a nisachim. I might have thought Hani Mila did Tzibur. Those are karbanot that everybody brings on the holiday. But a karban that only Aaron or only a Kohen Gadol brings on the holiday load does not need it. Therefore, kamashman that you have to do it. So why isn't it any different than Olat Yoledet? Ma'ishna Olat Yoledet, where again, with a Yoledet, a woman does not say, I want to bring a karban. She has a child. She has to then bring a karban Olah. Aaron's a Kohen Gadol, or any Kohen Gadol, has to bring a karban ayil. So why isn't it also included from the same idea? Because I might have thought, one second, Olat Yoledet is her own requirement, but it's not fixed in time. She can do it whenever she wants to do it. It doesn't have a fixed time. But something that the Torah says a Kohen has to do it, and they have to do it at this time. Maybe you don't bring nisachim, kamash malan, that you bring nisachim even in that case. And one more limud, Ola'il. There's an extra word, O. What does the extra word O include for nisachim? Lamali, lerabot et palgas. This includes a palgas. Now, palgas is probably a new word for many people. I have no idea what the etymology is. I'm sure Charlie has a Greek source for it. But what palgas refers to, and Rashi is not very helpful here, but what palgas refers to is that, and this is a good chance to set up the last 10 minutes of the daf, is that if you recall, the Torah has three categories of nisachim. One is for a shor, right? A cow, which includes any cow, any age, any type. You bring a certain amount, right? Half a hin, etc., right? A certain amount. But then there's separate things for keves and ayil, right? And we bring different nisachim for a keves or for an ayil. What's the difference between a keves and an ayil? The difference is the age, right? They're both species of goats and sheep and whatever, small cattle. But a keves is in the first year of life, and an ayil is after the first year, a 2-year-old animal and beyond. A palgas is generally referred to as like a in-between, like a teenager, we call it, or somewhere in the middle. And a palgas, generally, Rashi here is not so clear about it, but Steinsaltz says an intermediate age between childhood and adulthood. Okay, that's exactly what it means. So we generally refer to it as the 1 month after an animal hits 12 months and becomes 1 year old, so it's not a keves anymore, but we don't call it an ayil until it hits 13 months. For that 1 month in between, teenage years or palgas years, that is a separate class of animals. that animal also requires nisachim, okay? Because it's not an ayil and it's not a keves. So that is why you need a pasuk to tell you that you also bring nisachim on that animal. Says the Gemara, 1 second. There's a famous machloket in the Mishnah in Para about this kind of animal, right? Because Hanichal Reb Yochanan, Damar Bir Yahu, Reb Yochanan is of the opinion that a palgas is a third independent category of animals. It's not. It's based on a Mishnah. The Mishnah says Ikrivo, right? If you the pasuk says by what's it called? It says by a different this is a Mishnah Para, but different karbanot, that if you have to bring a karban, a person says, I have to bring a karban, and they bring a karban from a palgas. So they bring this 13-month-old sheep, let's say, right? Says the Mishnah in Para, Mevi alav niskei ayil. You bring nisachim like a 2-year-old, not like a 1-year-old. But eino alalo mizivcho, doesn't count for your zavach. And Rabbi Yochanan says there in Para, or about the Mishnah in Para, oh la'ayil, the Rabbot at the palgas, that the ayil is its own category. And so if you said, I'm going to bring a keves, and you bring a palgas, you're not yotze your mitzvah of bringing a keves, because it's not a keves, it's its own birya, its own category. El lebar peda, but bar peda, it talks about the Mishnah there, and he says, Damar maiti umatni, you in fact can bring the palgas as a karban, but you don't know if it's a keves or an ayil, right? And your commitment was to bring a keves, or your commitment was to bring an ayil. So you bring it and you make a condition. Disfakele, it's uncertain, right? Meaning you make a condition and say, if this palgas is a keves, then I'm yotze my mitzvah, and I'm done. If it's not, if it's an ayil, I'll bring a separate karban that will fulfill my mitzvah of a keves, right? So that, according to Bar Pada, you're allowed to do. But if it's a suffix, then it just is a problem that we don't know if it's an ayil or a keves. But you don't need a pasuk to say there's a third category. There is no third category, it's just we don't know. So it's your the Rebuya Sveka. Do you need a pasuk to tell you what to do in this third category? Says, well, you're right. According to Bar Pada, it's a problem. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, there actually is a requirement for 3 categories of animals. There's baby animals, adolescent animals, and adult animals. And the halacha, just to be clear, is that adolescent animals are treated like adult animals. So when it says "oh la'ayil," it's adult, ayil, quote unquote, adult, 1-year-old, right? Adult animals and adolescent animals are treated the same way, and they're treated like an ayil. Okay. Now, continuing, we're going to get into this more detail. So that was an introduction. We'll get to hopefully to the Mishnah, right? Continuing the Gemara now, around 12 lines or 14 lines on the bottom. It says in the pasuk. We're continuing now in Shlach. It says, this is pasuk Yud Aleph, Kacha ye'aseh l'shar echad. This is how you should do it for one shar, la'ayol echad, or l'seba kvasim, o be'isim. Right? Which again, all these words seem incredibly redundant. You just told me do it. Why are you saying it again? So says the Gemara, what do we learn from each of these basically 4 limudim? L'shar echad matam alomer. What does it mean when it says for one shar? Says the Gemara, it's an interesting thing, which you probably wondered about, right? Because it's very strange in the Torah that the Torah has different requirements for Menachot if you have a young sheep or an old sheep. But by cows, it's all the same, right? You might have thought there should be a category for young cows and old cows. The Torah differentiated between sheep that are young, ayil, which is old, and keves, which are young. Maybe a baby cow, which we call an egel, right, a calf, should have its own category of nisachim. Therefore, the Torah says all shar have the same category. There's only one category for cows. Okay, so that's one limud. Then it says ola ayil. What do we learn from ola ayil? Matam lomar. Well, you might say the Torah differentiated between a sheep that is 1 year old or 2 years old, meaning 1 year old, meaning in the first year or in the second year. But what about a 3-year-old? What about a senior citizen sheep? Maybe when an animal gets to be 3, or again in the 3rd year, you should bring different nisachim. No. Once you're an ayil, which means once you're 1 year old, you're an adult forever. There's no change in your status. So once you reach the level of ayil, you stay that way forever. Okay, so that's the second limud. The third limud is it says, oh, l'seh b'kvasim. It says, or a seh that comes from sheep, right? We usually translate kvasim as lambs. And I don't really know the difference in all these animals, but a keves is usually translated as a lamb. right? Again, what we mean by kvasim are in the first year of life, a baby, not a baby, but a young animal. Matam Omer, what is that telling you? Says the Gemara, because lefisha matzinu shechileka katuv ben niskei keves and niskei ayil, right? We found that there's a difference between a male, a keves, and an ayil, which is a 2-year-old lamb and a ram, right? Yachol nichalek ben niskei kivsa l'niskei rechela. Right? Maybe there should be a difference in nisachim between a female lamb and a rachel, which is a ewe, right? Which is a mature female lamb. So maybe that should require a different kind of nisachim. Talmud Omer, o laseh b'kfasim, but it requires the same. It's not different. O laseh b'kfasim. And one more category, o be'izim, Talmud Omer. What does it refer to when it says in the fourth limud from this pasuk, or izim, right, which is goats generally? Since we found there's a difference again between a male lamb and a ayil or a ram, a 2-year-old, that you bring more nisachim, right? Fresh off our chad gadya. A baby goat is called a gidi. An older goat is called a seir, right? You might think that you bring different nisachim, whether it's a young goat or an older goat. Talmud Omer o be'izim. There's one category for all izim, and it's all like the younger ones, right? So basically, we're coming out now, I'm going to give it away, that all izim have the same status. All female goats, what are called rechelim, basically, have the same status. It's only the male lambs that you differentiate between a seh b'kfasim or a seh b'izim when it gets to be 2 years old. So that's the only category where you have different nisachim as the animal matures. And by cows, of course, there is no difference. There's all one category. Says the Gemara at the last line of Daf Tzadi Aleph Amabet, Amar of Papa, said of Papa, Badaklan Rava. You know, Rava used to give us a test. He would check us. And he would ask us, do you know Niskei Rechela Bikama? How much nisachim do you bring for a Rachel, Rechela, which is mature, right? So this is our question. Because a young Rachel, which we call, I guess, a kispa, right, is a kivsa, sorry, is brought as a young mature. It's a reviyatahin, let's say, right? The smallest amount. An older ayil, which is a male animal, it brings a shlishitahin. What about a female animal that's a rechela? How much do you bring? Now, everyone who learned daf with us just now knows that you bring the smaller amount. You bring a reviyit. But we didn't learn daf so well, said Rav Papa, but we knew a Mishnah in Shkalim. Pashitna le mimatnitim. We figured this out from the Mishnah in Shkalim. Because the Mishnah in Shkalim talks about a system that they had where basically everyone who came to the Beit HaMikdash, it was very uncommon to bring your own flour and wine from home because, different quality travel, you bring money, right? And you would go to the Lishka and you would give your money, and they had a post every day. Today, the cost of, different nisachim, right? Because nisachim for a gedi is a third of a hin, a shlishitahin. And nisachim for an ayil is the opposite. Reviyitahin is a gedi. Shlishitahin is an ayil. Half a hin is a par. So you would go and you would say, I want either an ayil, a gedi, or a par, right? A third, a quarter, or a half. So and you'd get a sticker, right? And the sticker would say whatever you paid for. So the sticker of gedi, this is now a quote from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, gedi, if you have the sticker for a gedi, mishamesh niskei tzon shel gdolim shel ktanim shel zcharim shel nekevot. That is for all sheep, whether they're big or small, whether they're male or female, with one exception, chutz mishel elim. The only exception is a male ram, which has to have a separate amount, and therefore you would have to get a petek called ayil, right, which was a third of a hin. But every other every other goat and sheep and small animal was called a gedi. And so that's the halacha, that all animals that are kispa, seira, etc., are all a quarter of a hin. An ayil is a third of a hin, and every par, whether it's an old par, an egel or not, is considered to be half of a hin, and that is what we learn from these many, many extra words in the psukim. So hopefully, everyone, when you read Parshat Shlach in a couple months, you'll think of all these things as you read each pasuk. Shavua Tov. It's good to be up to the Mishnah, and we'll see you all over the week.
Shavua Tov. Thank
Shavua
you.
Tov, good day.